I had our intel boys look into his background, and the file doesn't make pretty reading.
His name's Guba. General Alexei Guba. Did 5 years as a commandant in one of Stalin's Siberian gulags, where they nicknamed him the Dentist.
Why'd they call him the Dentist?
No idea. Sounds pretty scary, though.
From the very first time I landed on the island of Everon and came up against a handful of Soviet troops outside the small village of Morton, until 20 hours of playing later when I drove a sports car back through that same village on a now peaceful island, ArmA, Cold War Assault, gave me an experience I never expected to have. This video is going to be a fairly in-depth look into why I loved the game so much, and in doing that I am going to go into fairly decent spoiler territory for the campaign. But I think that even if you know what the missions and plot points are, actually experiencing the game for yourself is still incredible. So in this video I'm going to give a very brief background of the game, then jump through the game's campaign and standout missions and experiences in my time playing, then wrap up with notes on some other content the game has. Now, almost everything that this game does is slow and deliberate, which makes a lot of sense for a military sim game. So in this review, I'm going to embrace that spirit a bit and cover a lot of content, but I'll still try and keep it all fresh. Starting off with the background, I'll try and keep this section kind of short, because while it's good for context, there's a lot more important stuff to get to. So this game was originally released in 2001 and titled Operation Flashpoint Cold War Crisis. But following a falling out between the developers Bohemia Interactive and publishers Codemaster, Bohemia took their fancy engine and the rights to the game, while Codemasters took the Flashpoint name. So for almost a decade you had this weird thing where the original developers went off to make ArmA 1 and 2, while Flashpoint's direct sequels were by different teams on different engines. Then in 2011, Bohemia re-released the game under the new name ArmA Cold War Assault. So in this review I'll be calling it ArmA since I feel it's heavily related to the ArmA games even if it was originally from a different franchise. Now, with that context out of the way, let's move on to the real content, the mechanics and campaign. So in Cold War Assault you have 4 different player characters, all with their own unique gameplay elements. I'm going to cover them in the order they come up in the campaign, though with that said I'm not going to cover every single mission in the game, because some of them really do boil down to the basic, go here, shoot that, do this, repeat. Instead, I'm going to touch on any missions that were cool plot-wise, introduced major mechanics, or that I felt were really fun or interesting to play. So let's get into things. Cold War Assault is set in 1985, and it's following that style lots of Cold War fiction has, where an angry general wants more hardline Soviet aggression, so starts a coup to make it happen. The campaign all takes place in a small island chain, featuring 1 NATO, 1 Soviet, and 1 neutral island. All of these islands are several kilometer squares each, with missions only taking up small parts of each island at a time. The entire campaign kicks off as NATO forces lose contact with the neutral island and suspect something's wrong. Your first character is David Armstrong, a standard infantry soldier who's going through basic training, and then before you know it, your commander addresses your base and says you're heading to the island of Everon, because even if you are just a tiny force who aren't prepared for combat, you have to do something. Back to Armstrong in a helicopter as you fly into Everon, put your boots on the ground, and then, well, you don't know anything. I mean, well, you've got your commanding officer to tell you where to go and a map with notes on the mission plan, but you don't really know the terrain you're facing or specifics of enemies in the area. At first I was impatient and tried to rush off because I felt the AI were too slow, only to pretty quickly get picked off from a distance by Soviet infantry. This was the first lesson the game taught me. You need your squad to stay alive, and you need to try and keep them alive as well. This isn't a run and gun shooter, it's a slow tactical one. And because of that, as we pushed into the town of Morton, I got to really scan the layout of the entire village, checking every building in case an enemy was sneaking around. And this initial push into the island is fine. You're not really meeting much resistance, and you have your squad calling targets and it's all relatively safe. You just need to keep your head down and pick your shots. On that note, I really like the shooting in this game. It's all about placing your shots carefully and keeping your eyes peeled for enemies on the horizon. Bullets have a lot of weight, like 1 or 2 bullets can take down anyone, including you, so there's a lot of consequence to every shot you make. Thankfully the AI is pretty good as well. Neither your enemies or allies are aimbots making perfect shots, but they aren't spraying either. They use sightlines, noise, and communication to pick targets, which makes this game a decent challenge, but it doesn't usually feel cheap when you get killed. So back to the plot. These first few missions are just letting you get used to the decently deep shooting system, and letting you learn not to peek the enemy, which is good. The invasion even goes good at first as you seize the town of Morton and move further inland to displace the Soviets. That is until, as you push into another village, you get a radio call.
Tanks incoming from the south. Retreat immediately. Repeat, retreat immediately. Out.
Soviet tanks have been spotted going your way. You aren't prepared for this at all, and you have to retreat, and fast. Your squad falls back to Morton, and it's funny how quickly you start to associate the town with feeling safe from attack. You and the gang are making jokes and hanging around, though you and some other soldiers need to go out and patrol while the rest set up camp. And in my playthrough, while out on this patrol, I ran into Spetsnaz special forces, and everyone on the patrol bar me got killed. And the objective went from finish your patrol, and when your officer tells you you'll go back to camp, to oh god, oh fuck, run. This is another key part of the game. There's not many fail states. Like, as long as you're alive, the vast majority of missions can be completed, which means you can fuck up basically everything early on, and through sheer determination, still complete the mission. There's not really a branching path in the campaign or anything, but ArmA really is the kind of game where you make your own stories. Like, you're placed in scenarios, and it's what you do in that space with your tools that make the game good. So if you're bad at the game like I was in those early missions, you're going to end up spending a lot of time alone, because you let your squad die and didn't know how to scan the horizon, but are just about able to fight your way through to make those objectives. Back in Morton, the squad continues relaxing and talking, until word comes through that another unit needs help, and after you rescue them, you're told that the town of Montanak must fall, leading into the first night mission of the game, complete with flares and muzzle flashes lighting up the night, and it goes great until radio comes in.
Papa Bear to Black, back off. We have new orders. All U.S. Army personnel must withdraw from Everon. Backup no longer assigned. They've been called away. Out.
You and your squad load into a truck, only for it to come under attack, leaving you to hold off the Russians while you wait for a helicopter, which you then watch bail on you once the Hind shows up and attacks it. You're on your own now. And believe me, the feeling you get when you're looking at all this fall apart, only to go into the next mission with the setup being that everyone is dead except you, and that you're on your own, with nothing but kilometers of enemy-controlled land between you and the evac point, well, the game was starting to feel really special then. It was a turning point in the game where it was like, okay, you've had enough time to learn the mechanics of the game, now go and use them. Now might be a good enough point to explain that for every mission you get one save. So except for a few missions with checkpoints, it's more or less you pick where your checkpoint is. So while I crawled, ran and shot my way to the evac, I kept having to weigh up. Should I save now and lock in my progress? Or should I gamble a bit more so if I save then die, I won't have to repeat the stressful experience of hiding in a bush hoping this hind or tank didn't spot me and won't blow me up instantly. As I inched the town, news came in. We have to leave soon, we're about to be overrun. And then finally, sorry, we're out. Leaving me stranded on Everon in a forest alone. After some more scrambling to get to an alternative evac point, I got captured by Soviets. Though luckily rebel forces intercepted me near instantly and freed me. Though they actually did want something in exchange. They will take me to their leader and send me home, but you actually need to get to their leader in the first place, which isn't an easy task. This starts a few missions that have you try and fight your way through some villages to free civilians, before you end up changing into civilian clothes yourself and go through some roadblocks into Soviet territory, before having to hike to the rebel base, where they do send you back to NATO-controlled territory with a simple request to send them help as soon as possible. At this point, the game wasn't exactly getting stale, but it hadn't introduced new mechanics for a while, and even after how amazing that forest mission was, I was wondering if this was all that the game had. And I feel the devs knew this, because it's around here that the game starts spicing things up. After landing back on the NATO-held island of Malden, the first thing the commander tells you is that they're holding on for reinforcements and they won't send anything to help the resistance yet, and that since they need every man, you're being sent on night shift of guard duty. And this guard duty mission's a real palate cleanser. It really is just sitting out in the middle of nowhere waiting, and the first time I played it I didn't see anything, until an explosion went off killing me instantly. The second time I played it, I actually noticed 2 Black Op Russian troops sneaking over a hill and took them out before they could even take out our anti-air position. Though, while I was paying closer attention, I actually noticed boats in the distance and helicopters flying around. And when you're there trying to see if they're allied or not, you get worried about whether your island is even safe for Russian aggression. Around this point in the campaign, things are falling apart. NATO reinforcements aren't with you yet, and as you try and desperately hold off the Russian invasion, you can't manage it because as you're defending a town from a Russian attack, a giant column of T-70 tanks roll in and blow up your armor as they do. Yet again, you have to fall back, and you even end up resorting to guerrilla tactics, laying mines on a road to try and catch out that tank column to halt the Russian advance. This is where we get our second main character, Lieutenant Hammer. He's openly seen as a fuck-up by the other troops, but since they're lacking trained personnel, he's still allowed to command a tank. Tank combat in this game is actually pretty fun and simple too. Commanding your gunner and driver is done with the left and right click of the mouse, and then spacebar to switch ammo types. Lining up your shots and tactical positioning are all pretty simple as well, but now you're in one of the toughest things in any mission, so compared to Armstrong where you're killed by 1 or 2 bullets, driving around in a tank makes you feel indestructible, and I feel they capture this really well. The tank models are really cool too. They feel suitably cramped. When you're inside you have to use viewing ports for target spotting, and if you want a nice unobstructed view, you just open the hatch and look around, though now you're a super easy target, so this is a trade-off if you're in enemy territory. In your first tank mission, you move to intercept Russian BMPs and tanks, and the assault initially goes so well that you move in to attack the core Russian force on the island, only to be badly beaten back by their defences. Moving us nicely onto our third character, James Gostowski. James was hinted at earlier in the campaign as a retired Black Ops Special Forces guy who's been dragged back in for this special mission. You get dropped in on top of a mountain above the Russian position with a silenced submachine gun, some satchels, and the mission to do as much damage to their emplacements as you can. The style of gameplay for James is kind of the most unique in my opinion. Since you've got a silenced gun, you're able to take out groups of enemies without everyone nearby getting alerted. Being dressed in all black and usually doing night missions means you can sneak around pretty well too. Though, usually these missions involve taking out tanks, so if you're spotted, you will basically die instantly. And I actually love the chain of missions that introduce James, because Hammer faces a problem, James gets drafted in to solve it, and then in the next mission, you go back to Hammer to roll through the now weakened border zone, all thanks to James's work. So now we're getting into the main run of the game. As these 3 characters, you hold off and counter the Russian invasion, all doing well enough to get promoted, and with your promotions, you now control your own squads for most of the remaining missions. So while up to now you'd either been listening to your commanding officer or working by yourself, now you're the one telling your troops what to do and who to shoot at. The next 3 missions all introduce you to the basis for your squad tools. You go to a town and help hold the perimeter, then move out from the town to scout an enemy camp, and then finally, with the help of another squad, you move in to take out the Russian camp. These missions aren't crazy, but looking after a squad is pretty fun. It adds depth to the game at the point where you felt like a lot of the core features were locked down, so now you have to try and direct your squad and minimize losses to get the most out of the game. It's a feature that you can kind of ignore a bit and just tell your squad to follow you around, but you can really engage with it and start assigning soldiers to sub-teams and then tell them to get into vehicles, drive to locations, hold their fire, so on. It's a really good system. So now you've gotten most of the mechanics down, the first island throws you one last mission that was an absolute bastard. It was definitely my own impatience that ruined it, but the gist here is that your squad has to escort a convoy of weapons to the airport as they're going to be used in the invasion of Everon. The issue is that there's some Russian troops out in the countryside still, and they are a risk to you and the convoy. So at the start of the mission, you're given a few potential routes for the convoy, pick the one you think is best, and then clear the path while they follow you. I kept messing up and losing troops, making it hard to continue, or I got myself killed. So eventually I got fed up with this mission, blew up all bar one of the convoy trucks, and drove to the airport myself over the mountains. Unsurprisingly, this counted as a mission failure. Though thankfully, ArmA still lets you move on to the next mission, just with a per score. This actually ties in with the cool running counter the game has, where you can get special cutscenes of getting a medal, or if you're just awful at the game, you'll get several warnings before being discharged. It's a nice touch, though in my playing, I was mostly just mediocre, so I got some commendations without a medal cutscene. We're finally now at the point of the plot when you return to the island of Everon, with the Russians seemingly on the back foot. Then the game hits you with a cutscene that shows all the NATO forces gearing up to take the fight to the Russians, and I just love how over the top it is. Simultaneously, it feels like such a reward for fighting to this point, while also being so charming to see a now 20-year-old game try and blow you away with its in-engine cutscene. One of the last missions I want to highlight is a Black Ops mission where you try and track down a Russian camp based on its vague location on the island of Everon. You start out on a hill above the town of Morton, and it was so nice after so many hours to get to see the town again, even if I didn't get to go in it, and even if I got to see the Russian troops walking around in it. What I ended up doing was watching trucks move around and try and figure out where there was a lot of activity before following them to the hidden Russian base. This took me a few tries and was kind of a bastard again, but what I did was attack the base from a forest, taking out most of the guards, then ran in and planted timed explosives at the hinds, then stole one for myself, leaving my team behind and telling them to go to the extraction point, because I was a shitty leader. This is another great example of the game just letting you do whatever you want within a given setup. Equally, I could have ordered my squad into a jeep and driven them to the exit myself, or gone back through the forest the way we came in, but I wanted to fly a hind, so I did. Finally, after like 20 missions, we get introduced to the final player character, Sam Nichols, who's a pilot. And let me tell you, learning to fly a helicopter was very satisfying. Early on, all your helicopter engagements are just ferrying around troops, learning the controls, how to gain speed and slow down, how to land and all that. They even include some tools to auto-hover to make things easier for you, though I prefer not to use them just to challenge myself. And yeah, not surprisingly, learning to fly a helicopter with keyboard controls was hard. But it was super rewarding even 5 hours later when I'd mostly figured out decent control and got to do all these air-to-air combat missions. Most of the air missions are pretty standard, as I said, ferrying around soldier, and then you have some combat ones. But it's mostly to break up the style of gameplay. One in particular was my favourite. Throughout the game, it's been established that you can't get helicopter support if there's Skilkas in the area, because they just tear them apart. Well, in the second last air mission, you get to face a Shilka, and fuck me was it a pain. Like, it totally messes with you, so you've got to move low and fast, staying out of its line of sight, only to then try and strafe it as you fly past. And let me tell you, the fact the next mission let me hijack a Shilka and blow up 3 other ones is exactly what I needed to take my revenge. Though, it did take out one of my allies. On to the final stretch, Everon has been secured and we're just about to take the fight to the Russians. Sam Nichols gears up into jets and takes off to blow up some Russians before the ground forces invade. And by God, plane combat in this game is bad. Like, don't get me wrong, it's fun and interesting to see it in the engine, but I was going too fast to be able to pick targets. And if you're wondering about why my view distance was so small, when I put it to higher, the game would crash on this mission. I mean, this game is pretty old, so I expect my system to be able to handle it by now, but view distance was one of the things that I couldn't change from the default setting without messing with the frame rate quite a bit. Anyway, at the end of this mission, your plane malfunctions and you get trapped in enemy territory. And after a very long, strange cutscene, you're captured and scheduled for execution by the Russians, while Armstrong parachutes into the south of the island and captures a base there. Now, as Sam Nichols, the pilot, you have a very interesting mission, and it's to escape from prison and make your way south because you kind of expect that NATO forces would have landed by now. So, what I think you were expecting to do was to run off into the mountains and then go from there. But what I did instead was I hijacked a hind, but ended up crashing it over the mountains anyway. Then I literally had to use the Big Dipper to find the pole star to identify north, and then use that information to go the opposite way and head south to hopefully run into allied troops. Now this escape mission was stupidly creative, and it was kind of fun to be out in the dead of night, hoping that you wouldn't run into any Russians out in this mountain, looking at the stars and trying to think to yourself, which one is the Big Dipper? Because all you had to go off was a note in your journal that the game gave you for that mission. But apart from that, I didn't know how to really read it. I just found the Big Dipper, said, okay, that's vaguely north, so I need to go the other way. So yeah, very cool mission, kind of a nice break of pace, pretty fun. Anyway, after that, let's wrap things up. The game has shown almost all of its tricks now, so I'll finish up the plot for any of you who care about it quickly. The evil Russian general has nukes, which is kind of a logical conclusion for any game in the Cold War setting, and he's not afraid to use them. So James has to sneak into his house to find the location of the nukes, before Armstrong gets his ass kicked trying to stop it, though I just about managed to get this after a few hours of trying. After stopping the nuke, you track down and arrest Guba before he can flee the island, and then stop his second nuke that he has, and then the campaign's over. I mean, I skimmed a lot of stuff for this review, so it's not 100% play-by-play, but that's essentially all of the campaign of the game. Well, except for one final mission. This one has you going back to Everon as James 11 years later. And you get to drive around the island and pick up all the player characters, and then go to a pub in town as the game fades to black and ends properly. And as I said at the start of the review, driving through all these towns is so strange after 20 hours of playing. Like, you actually recognize some of the towns and remember what you did there and how hard you had to fight to take them. I played this game over the course of around 2 months, playing an hour or so every week, so it really felt like I had spent time with these locations. So to get to go through them one last time actually felt nice, and it's strange that this game could actually manage to make me feel sentimental for the small towns of Everon, but I loved that it was able to do that. So I guess that's the strange thing about ArmA Cold War Assault. Obviously, when a game is 20 years old like this one, it's not going to be the prettiest game, and especially when it's got a franchise that has further entries, it's probably not going to have the one with the most features. And on top of all that, when it's a story-driven campaign for a game that doesn't really care about story but more so its mechanics, it's not really the story you're here for. And yet, despite all those reasons that ArmA Cold War Assault should just be an outdated, obsolete game, there's something here. There's something that just is very charming and well put together about the game, that even almost 20 years since its release, it can stand on its own 2 feet. So if you're wondering if you should get this game, it's €4 on Steam and goes on sale pretty often, like every game on Steam. And on top of that, it's included in some ArmA franchise bundles, so I would say if you're interested, go for it. Obviously, I wouldn't have made a video this long and spent 30 hours making this review if I thought this game wasn't worth at least talking about. So I think this game has a lot to offer, and even though the later ArmA games have their own peaks that make them better probably in almost every way, that doesn't mean this game is bad. I still think it's an excellent game and worth checking out if you want to kill a bit of time in a old, weird game that's really charming for its time. The most obvious critique for this game that I feel it wouldn't be fair for me to make this video and not mention it is that the AI was very ambitious. And a very ambitious AI in 2001, even now, means it's going to break a lot. So there was plenty of missions where my teammates were like, let's wait for our allies to blow up that tank. And they were clearly meant to be some sort of scripted thing where our allies blow up a tank, but that tank would just turn and blow up our allies instead. And you just have to restart the mission because, as I said earlier, there's not fail states in the game, or there's not as many fail states as in modern games. So sometimes it's up to you to either realize that the trigger's broken and restart the mission, or sometimes go out of your way, find what trigger is broken and fix it yourself. It doesn't take away too much from the game and only kind of comes up randomly. If you're lucky, it won't happen at all. If you're really unlucky, it'll happen lots. But it happened to me a fair bit and I still really enjoyed the game, so I don't think it's a huge detriment, though it is something that's there. The version sold on Steam does include one DLC called Resistance, which acts as a prequel to the game, though there was a second DLC called The Red Hammer, which was made by Codemasters after the Fallout out, so Bohemia doesn't have the rights to it, so it's not included in this version of the game. That one has you serving as a Soviet soldier. Neither of them I really felt should be covered in this review because while they're interesting, this review has been stupidly long, and if I were to start trying to get into their campaigns, this would be too long a video. So I felt since this was a €4 game that it was comfortable to only cover the core chunk of it because it's pretty cheap and you'll know if you like it. This video has swelled to become my longest video by a decent margin, so while I won't cover them in detail at all, I couldn't finish things without mentioning how the campaign for this game, no matter how much I praised it, was only a small part of why this game did so well to begin with. A vibrant modding community who dedicated themselves to expanding in-game features and even making plenty of overhaul mods like LEGO Wars, Warhammer 40k, and a Dune mod helped give this game a long life, which is why it's still referenced today. And like any ArmA game, right from the beginning, Cold War Assault grew its own dedicated online units that played missions together for years after release. I'm aware enough about the multiplayer and the mods that I knew I had to mention them. Though as I said, my experience is heavily rooted in the campaign, which is why I spoke at such lengths about it instead of these other excellent parts of the game. So yeah, this video is far more rambly than the other ones I've made. In part it's because ArmA is just such a big, dense game. I felt to categorically go through everything, even like I tried to do here, would be very, very tough and very, very dense when compared to other games I've made videos about. So it's a bit more freestyle. After this video, I don't know what to expect next. I have a few games on a list, and I'm going to get to that next. Though suggestions are always appreciated in the comments. I've been getting some recently, and they've been really nice. So yes, please like, comment, subscribe. All of that's amazing. You can follow me on Twitter, which is going to be shown on screen here. And that's everything from me. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.